Well, welcome back, class. We are still continuing our flight from Salina to Denver, and we're going to do just a real quick review. I've set us up here on my simulator to actually reinsert the route. I'd like to have you, in the meantime, go to the modules that contain the Aerosim instructions for flight and go ahead and pick that dispatch release up for flight 123 from Salina to Denver. Make sure you have that up and ready. Open your iPad up, go to your Aerosim free play, and get yourself set up there so we can follow along. I don't care exactly where you're at. I believe you may have your route already plugged in. I do not have my route plugged in because I wanted to review that one more time with you, but at normal speed, so you can see how it's done. Again, I probably won't be real detailed about how I do it. I'm just going to plug it in so you can see how quickly it can be done. I've kind of got some of this stuff memorized, so I can go a little faster than most of you. But let's take a look at the Aerosim instructions. Let's say that we're going to start out from the provided step number 3 from the provided simulated dispatch release and PDC and other documentation. Load the routing for the simulated flight. That's where we're going to start right now. I'm going to say that we've completed our initialization. We've done some checklists. I've come back from the outside after a walk around, sat down. I've completed my final flow, got that PDC, and got the ETHOS. So I've got all the information I need to finish up the routing, and here's how we do it. Verify this is it. Okay, I'm taking off on runway 17 at Denver, so I'm going to go to my departure page. I'm going to select 17. I'm going to execute that. I'll go back to the flight plan, verify I have 17 in the original runway, and then I'm going to go to Hayes. Hayes is a direct point. I can look down here at my verified clearance routing, and Hayes is the next fix. So HYS, I will insert Hayes here. I will execute that and go back to my flight plan page just to verify I have runway 17 via direct to Hayes. Go back to my flight plan page. On the next page, my next fix is going to be OTHI. I'm going to do this just a little different than I had showed you before. I know that OTHI is a transition fix to Dandy, so I'm going to immediately go to my arrival page, push the departure arrival button twice, go down to Denver, select Dandy, and I see that OTHI pops up as a transition. I'm going to take it, and I know that I'm planning on landing on 17 left at Denver, so I'll select that now. And I will take vector, so I'll accept that, and I will execute that flight plan, and I should pretty much have it in. I'm going to go back to flight plan. I'm going to double check. It looks like I got that's all correct on the page number 1. I go to page number 2, and oh, I see a discontinuity right off the bat. So apparently I have a discontinuity between Hayes and OTHI. So what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to take OTHI, I'm going to drop it down into the scratch pad. I'm going to bring it up to R1, and this will close the discontinuity, and it did. So now I have direct to OTHI, direct to the Dandy arrival, finishing off at Mile High VOR. I'm going to check to make sure my runway's in there, but instead of looking things over on this page, I'm going to go ahead and do it on the legs page. I still need to execute because I've got some dotted lines there, so I will execute. The line goes solid, and now I'm good to go back to my legs page, and I want to change my MFD to the plan view, so I will change the format to the north up view, and doing that will make the north up page available to me and I'm in the legs page, that allows me to use my cursor buttons to step through the routing. At this point in time, I would get my iPad EFB out, and I would have loaded the route up in it, and I will have my charts and my routes available to me to check every point along the way to make sure I didn't miss anything. So let's go ahead and check the routes out. There's Hayes, Othi, go to Sales and Prague and Kippy and Cleve and Dandy. And while I was looking at Dandy, the person looking at the charts, reading this stuff off, happened to say, hey, we have a crossing altitude at Dandy restriction there. We're supposed to go 250 knots. I'm going to put 250 knots in my scratch pad. I will put slash, and they say we're supposed to cross that at 17,000 feet. So I will put this restriction in right next to Dandy. That's in place. And now I will execute that because I modified the flight plan. And now I show that Dandy has the restriction in there. That's good. This is why we review with our charts in our hand to make sure that everything is done correctly. I go to PD, goes, and then to mile high, and then I say discontinuity. I'm going to reduce the range. And I can see that discontinuity occurs right here because somewhere back here, I'm going to get vectors, hopefully, to come around and intercept the approach. And now I'm done looking over the approach. I do not have to really go into detail about the actual approach because that's just a plan. As I get closer to Denver before the top of descent, I will have gotten a new ATIS, and we will have made sure that they are landing runway 17 left. They may have turned the airport around, and at that point in time, I would have wanted to reinsert a new runway if they changed. So this is just a plan that also gives me a much better distance when I'm looking at my flight plan on the distance right here. Some companies provide you what they think about the distance should be based on the plan in the dispatch, and this company actually tells me it's supposed to be 372 miles, so I'm pretty close. I think my flight planning and my route construction in the FMS is probably correct. So let me go back to the legs page. I can go back to my regular MFD view that I like to use, which is this view. It gives me mileages between fixes, so I can just double check while I'm flying the aircraft. All right, looks like I'm pointed down the runway. You should also be pointed down the runway, and we're going to double check a few things now. So step 3 is complete. I've loaded the routing, I've checked the routing, and now I'm going to wait. I'm getting close to step 4, and it's about 2 to 5 minutes prior to push. I've run my checklist. There's also one other thing I want to do before I insert the final load numbers. I want to go through and I want to double check to make sure I have all my inputs in here correctly. So I'm going to check my course. Nothing to put in there necessarily. Autopilot switch is not on. That's correct. I have my transfer switch, my little arrow pointed to the captain's side. That is correct. I do not want it to be pointed that direction because we're flying on the captain's side today. The speed, can't do much with that right now. I have a speed here. I can't do anything with this stuff until I get my load sheet, because my load sheet is going to tell me how much I weigh. And from how much I weigh, I can calculate my V speeds for takeoff. Since I don't have the load sheet, I can't go that far. So now I double check the approach button, looks good. Heading button, is there something I can do with that? Sure. I can put that to runway heading, which just happens to be at Salina 173. So there's 173 right there. And I do not need my nav button selected. Altitude, I've got an altitude. So if I were to look at my dispatch release, and look at my clearance, it would have told me that I'm to maintain 4,000 feet. So I definitely want to set 4,000 feet in there at this point in time. There's my 4,000 feet. That's good. And then I'm going to come on down here and I'm going to verify that I've got my trims in place. It's nothing you can do about it on this scenario. It is what it is. How about looking at my radios? I could be setting up some radio frequencies, and I can set up my, I can just read through my clearance. You got my 4,000 foot in there. I'm going to expect flight level 300, 10 minutes. So I can go to my perf and perf init page, and I can set in flight level 300 as my planned cruising altitude. Now I've got it in that position, and I'm still waiting for the load. So I'm just going to leave this page up. So I got it there. When the gate agent hands me my load sheets, I'll be ready to plug those numbers in immediately because I have very little time left. The next thing I want to do is it says departure is on 124.4. I'm going to go to my radio page. I'm going to set up my radios. We always talk to ATC on number 1 radio. Number 2 radio over here is reserved for company frequencies. Maybe if I wanted to get an ATIS, I could get it on this. If I wanted to do it manually, I like to get it over ACARS. It's easier to do. So at any rate, ATC frequencies over here. So I'm going to set up my departure frequency 124.4 goes into the scratch pad, and I'm going to put it right up here on top. I also have a frequency for ground control that I'm going to be needing to use. So I'm going to go 121.9er, and I'm going to set that up here. So now I have 121.9er. In the recall position, I have my departure clearance, and I'll just have to pull up my tower frequency when I get to the end of the runway. I also have an execute my modified flight plan. I modified some stuff, so I'm going to go ahead and execute that, take care of that issue. And now I'm pretty well all set up. I've completed everything I can do up to this point. We run a checklist. We'll do the EV4 start checklist down to the line. At the line, I will go ahead and brief my co-pilot. My co-pilot will brief me. We'll discuss what the flight's going to look like. There are certain briefing cards, briefing items that we would actually go through. But I've kind of already done that. I've already set things up. So I'm good to go with that for now, since this is a simulated program. Okay, at this point in time, let's just say that the gate agent finally showed up, and she has brought my load sheet. So we're going to rotate down here, and there's my load sheet available to me. Okay, I've got my perf init page brought back up. I'm back on that page, and the passenger count is 55 passengers at 205 pounds each. So 55 / 2, clear that, 205. I'm going to put that up into the passenger weights on L2. I've got my cargo weight, 2,300 pounds. Put that in cargo, and fuel is 9,990 pounds. And I will put that into that fuel line. And if you'll notice that the gross weight of the aircraft auto-populated for me, and it should match up to 67, 70, 50, which is on the load sheet, and it does. So at least it's pretty close. Sometimes it won't be right on. You might have used some fuel, burning fuel with the APU, whatever the case might be, but it's pretty close. I'm comfortable with that. I'm going to go ahead and execute the flight plan because I put in a cruise altitude and that sets everything back up. Okay. Now that I know and verified my gross weight, I can come down and get my flip cards out. In this case, I provided you with the V speeds already. So now we'll put the V speeds in. And we do that by coming over to our selector for the V speeds. And if you'll notice, right now it's in the V target position, but I want the V speed position. So I'm going to click the knob over to reflect that, and it brings down V1 for me. V1 happens to be 125. So I will dial that in. And then I will select it with the button up above the knob. Select that, brings down VR. So now I can put my VR speed in, 126. I will select that, put it back up in the V speed stack, and I will put my V2 in, and V2 is 136. And I will select that, put it back up into the stack. V1 comes back down if I had to make any changes. Now, the only one I need to change now is VT, and that will be on the target side. So I'll move the knob back to VT. VT shows up in my little scratch pad. VT shows on my speed to be 185. I will put 185 in here. $185's in, and select that, and there we go. I can turn this back to VT, doesn't really matter. Now I have my V speeds in. I still have one last thing to do. I need to move my speed bug up to the same speed that V1 is. So I need to make that look like 125. That means my speed bug is going to go up out of sight. So I'll be using this indication here to set 125. I will use my speed knob up here to do that. 125. And now my speed knob is set to 125. V speeds are in, and speed bug is set. I have my loads in. I have my flight altitude that I'm planning to cruise at in. I can go back to my legs page, and I verify real quickly that I'm on runway 17. We're going to Hayes as the first fix, and that looks pretty good for me. And I have my heading bug turned to my runway heading. So I've done my briefing, told the captain everything that I'm going to set up and do, or the captain has told me in this case what he's going to do. And we'll move on to the next step. So step 4 is completed, and I have done everything I can do. Return your, if you've figured it out, you can put your iPad to the landscape, to the profile orientation to do a lot of the iPad work, but now return it back to the landscape orientation. Load the V speeds. We've just done that. Enter each V speed. So that's what I just showed you how to do. Step 5, review the routing on the legs page, close any discontinuities. I'm going to go down and just page through the legs page. I've got that discontinuity at a mile high. I'm good with that. Doesn't matter. I'm going to go back to the legs page, bring up the runway that I'm taking off so I can see the first fix. And we have been able to load up the V speeds. We've already preloaded the weights into our sim control. That's just a simism. And we're going to verify that we are repositioned, pointed down the runway. So make sure you click on the little airplane symbol that sets on the runway. And then you can start your engines by hitting your under the sim control, then close your sim control screen. That's for you guys on your iPads. I've already got my engines running because I knew it was coming mine's a little more difficult to get started. So let's scroll on down here to step 8, and starting left to right across the top of the MCP, I'm just going to double check. I'm going to verify that the command arrow at the top of the corner is over in my correct location, and it is. Set the speed to V1, I did that. Heading set to runway heading for departure, it is. Altitude set to the assigned altitude for my initial level off is 4,000 feet. Starting from right to left across the bottom, set the flaps to flaps 8. I need to do that. And verify the landing gear is down. Press the toga button to push the flight, put the flight director into view and to make sure it's in the climb. So I'm going to push this button. I'm going to see TO, and my command bars move up. That's where I want them to go at this point in time. And set the nav source to FMS1. Verify you're in FMS1. We are good to go. We are now set up and ready for takeoff with our Aerosim program. It's not exactly the way you do it on the line, but it'll get you to the end of the runway and get you taking off. Now let's move on to step 9. I'll pull that on up. Step 9 says what we're going to do to take off is set the throttles to the togo position. That would be right up in here. And the airspeed will come alive at 40 knots because that's the bottom of the tape. And we'll see what 80 knots coming up. 80 knots is a special speed because after 80 knots, we will not abort or reject the takeoff unless we have an engine failure, engine fire, the aircraft simply will not fly. Then we would abort. But after V1, we are going to go ahead and continue our flight when we get to VR, because after V1, we theoretically do not have enough runway, possibly, to get stopped before the end of the runway. So that's why we use V1 as our last opportunity to shut the aircraft down. After V1, we wait till VR, rotate the aircraft. And the indicator in this case will indicate a rotation. The little airplane will start to come up, and what will happen then is the vertical speed indicator will start to indicate a climb. As soon as it indicates a climb, you're going to want to hear gear up. So we'll select gear up. We will select climb mode as soon as our airplane gets right up into the command bars, and we will select climb mode, which is this button right here. Okay, that will put us into climb mode. So if I'm flying, I would request that the other pilot select that button for me because I do not have the autopilot on. So I have no right to be touching anything up here on the MCP without the autopilot being on. Okay, now as soon as I select climb mode at 400 feet, I'm going to ask for heading mode in this case. I need to put the aircraft in some sort of lateral navigation. So that's either going to be heading mode or nav mode. For the purposes of this takeoff, we're going to use heading mode. If we were doing an RNAV departure, we would use nav mode. But we don't have an RNAV departure. We're leaving Salina, no SIDS here, so we're just going to be in heading mode. At 800 feet, I'm sorry, at 600 feet, we're going to go ahead and select the autopilot on. And then at 800 feet, we're going to hear this term, acceleration altitude. And the flying pilot, because the autopilot's on, will reach up and turn his speed knob so that it reflects 200 feet, 200 miles an hour. And then the aircraft's nose will dip down and begin to accelerate. Why? Because we are in climb mode, and climb mode holds the speed. If we increase the speed, the nose has to come down to get to the speed. Once the speed starts to come up, it takes about a second or two, then we will say flaps up, and the non-flying pilot, the pilot monitoring, we'll select flaps 1. Then we sit there and we have a few seconds to wait for VT minus 15. When we get to VT, this is VT 185. When we see it coming down on the speed tape, we'll say VT minus 15. And at that point in time, we're going to bring the throttles back to climb thrust. And we will be setting the speed to 250. You at that time call for the after takeoff checklist. So let's see if we can get this done. Here's what I'm going to recommend everybody do is at this phase of your flight, take a snapshot because you're not going to get this right the first time. So I'm going to clear out the pencil marks and I'm going to go to my snap and I'm going to say save and I'm going to say takeoff at Salina. So I'm going to go, and you can do the same thing. You're going to put it in a little different. TO, and I'm going to space SL. Actually, I'll put, I'll backspace here. This will be KSLN. So I'm anticipating I'm going to muck this up. So I don't want to start my whole thing over. So here I go. I'm going to save it. Now I have my takeoff position saved. I've done everything I can do. All I have to do is get through step 9 without making a mistake. This is called a flap 8 profile. Now, for you operating your Aerosim free play, here's how I want you to do it. This is not real life. This is the way you have to make the Aerosim fly. You're going to push the throttles up to toga. You're going to wait for the airspeed to come alive, 40 knots, 80 knots, and then you're going to say V1, VR, the aircraft will automatically rotate up. And as soon as it starts to see some V speed, vertical speed here, you'll go gear up. And as soon as the aircraft gets into the command bars, you're going to go speed mode and then immediately hit autopilot. Don't wait for the 600 feet. It won't do well for you. So you can go climb mode, you can hit heading select, autopilot, and at 800 feet, you can begin to set the speed to 200 knots. But if you don't do these first few things one after another, you're not going to get off the ground very well. So let's see if we can get this off the ground in good shape. I'm my own pilot monitoring and pilot flying, so let's see how well this works. Put it into toga. Now I'm waiting for the speed to come up. That'll tell me I've got my simulator set up correctly. Might take a little bit for it to get to 40. There it goes 40. And at 80 knots, I'll say 80 knots. The other guy says 80 knots. We're past 80 knots. We're waiting for the pilot monitor to say V1. He says V1, rotate. Aircraft rotates. He says positive rate, landing gear up. And we go climb mode, heading mode, autopilot on. Okay, at 800 feet, we will do acceleration to 200 knots. Okay, we're about there, so 200 knots. As you'll notice, the nose will come down slightly. And flaps 1. Okay, now I'm waiting for VT. There's my T, minus 15. So when it gets to about here on the speed, I will set thrust to climb. And actually flaps will be up. Set climb thrust. Okay, I'm still accelerating. Now I can go ahead and set my speed to 250. Wasn't real pretty, but it got the job done. I'm now in the air, and I'm at 3,500, climbing up to 4,000. I'm accelerating up to 250 knots. As I level off at 4,000 feet, I need to bring my power back. Otherwise, I'm going to exceed the 250 knot speed that I've got selected. This is my trend line. I'll be there in 10 seconds. So I'm going to bring the power on back. Bring the speed up just a little bit. I'm looking at my trend line right there, and I'm bringing the power back ever so slightly using my plus or minus buttons till my trend line shows neither positive or negative on the speed. And it looks pretty close right there. I feel pretty good. Let's go ahead and freeze at this point in time. Freeze your Aerosim, and let's take a look at where we're at. This would be a position where we're going to actually take a snapshot. We're going to insert it into our loft instruction sheet and say, this is what it looks like. And so if you look at step 10, aircraft is clean, speed is 250, heading mode, we're in heading mode, and we're on a heading of, let's see, 176 degrees, and we're level at flight level, or at 4,000 feet MSL. I'm freezing, I'm not really moving, but I'm just going to check to make sure everything looks good. I'm looking at this, I'm going to make sure my gear was up, I'm going to make sure I'm at 0 flaps, my thrust levers are positioned appropriately, I have no trend bar here, and I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to increase my range. I don't like that range. It's not far enough. So I'm going to increase the range right here. And now I can begin to see my course heading over to Hayes. So I like this. What else could I see? Runway 17, Hayes. I'm golden. I'm going to take a snapshot of this, and that will be my first picture that I'm going to have once I'm airborne. Okay, let's call it quits for the evening right now. If you can get the aircraft up off the ground and get to this position, I'm going to feel real good about you. You're going to feel real good about yourself. So in the meantime, practice, practice, practice. And again, keep the dirty side down and the shiny side up.